Welcome to Clarity Matters, the podcast where we cut through noise and complexity to help leaders think, communicate, and lead clearly. If we're honest, most of us experience doubt quite regularly. We question our decisions, wonder whether we're seeing the full picture, or feel uncertain about the best way forward. And yet, in leadership, doubt is often treated as something to hide. Clear leadership is usually associated with confidence, decisiveness, and certainty. We expect leaders to have the answers and show the way forward with clarity. My guest today argues that this assumption may actually be holding leaders back. Jenny Williams is an executive coach and the author of the newly released Brilliant Doubt, a book that challenges the idea that strong leaders must always appear certain. Instead, she suggests that doubt, when we understand it and work with it well, can sharpen our thinking, improve our decisions, and ultimately help us lead with greater clarity. In her work with senior leaders, Jenny explores the different ways doubt shows up, from self-doubt to situational and systemic uncertainty, and how learning to engage with those doubts can strengthen leadership rather than weaken it. Jenny describes doubt as the grit in the oyster essential for creation, which I love because it reminds us that the discomfort leaders feel when they're uncertain can actually be the starting point for better thinking and better decisions. So today we're going to explore a fascinating paradox, how doubt, something leaders are often taught to suppress, might actually be the key to clearer thinking and better decisions. Jenny, welcome to Clarity Matters podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's brilliant to be here, Louise.
We actually met almost 10 years ago when you were my executive coach. Our work together guided me through a deep phase of professional doubt coming from all three of the sources that you highlight in the book. Your work explores how leaders think and make decisions in complex environments. So I'm really looking forward to the perspective that you'll bring to our conversation today. So let me start there. We often equate leadership with being decisive and certain. In Brilliant Doubt, you challenge that. How can doubt actually become a pathway to clearer thinking and better decisions rather than a sign of weak leadership?
I think doubt is critical for clearer thinking and better decisions. So that's my start point with it. And I think part of the issue is our relationship with doubt. You know, we're all so familiar with the kind of doubt to where we're overthinking, that swirling procrastination and sort of stuck phase. And that's what gives doubt a bad reputation. And actually, when you start to unpack it and actually look at the role of doubt and also the way that other disciplines use doubt, then you can start to see the intelligence that it can bring to leadership. So one of the things that I talk about in my book is I look at science, for example, and actually doubt goes hand in hand with science. It's one of the ways that they make the breakthroughs. If you think about things like peer review studies, essentially they're doubt review studies. You know, you're inviting your peers to doubt your work in a really constructive and helpful way, which gets to better thinking ultimately and clearer thinking. So a number of disciplines actually use doubt really well. You know, in coaching we use doubt. You know, we all have supervision where we actually doubt our work and we look at what's going on there. But we don't talk about doubt in terms of leadership. And yet I know it goes hand in hand with leadership. And I think it's in part because of what I talked about, this fact that actually we're so familiar with the bad side of doubt. And actually what we need to start talking about is this other side of doubt. And this is what I call active doubt. And so if you think about the other side is inactive doubt, where we're swirling and we're overthinking and we're not going anywhere. And actually, when we learn to use doubt actively and constructively, that's what gets us to clearer thinking and better decisions. And so for me, active doubt is a process. And it's about bringing doubt to the table, asking what it's got to say and to tell us, and then working and engaging with it constructively rather than pushing it to the side, so that it can help you to get to that clarity and that decision making. And one of the things I talk about is, all change starts with a doubt. So if you are not up for change, you're not up for progressing, then, you're not going to have a relationship with doubt. But if you accept that doubt is part of change, actually that starts to give it a seat at the table, and it starts to give it a role in terms of leadership conversations. And so for me, it's about how do we reframe it and then use it constructively in a leadership context, because when you do that, actually it gets you to a really good place.
This idea of reframing it is so critical when it comes to doubt. When you go through life thinking that doubt is a negative, it's a weakness, it's an uncertainty, I'm not sure, therefore it's weak. But
Yes.
how you're explaining it here is actually the opposite of that entirely.
Completely, because it brings with it creativity. If you just look at it through the lens of creativity and curiosity, if you are unsure about something, then you start to get into that possibility space, that what if space. You're not saying, actually, I know where we're going with this. You're starting to open up your thinking because of doubt. And you're saying, okay, I'm not sure about that, but what if? Let's look at that further. Let's unpack that. So it brings with it, this quality of curiosity and creativity. And if you think about the complexity that leaders are facing at the moment, we need more creativity. We need more curiosity, because we're in such uncharted waters. And that, for me, the paradox of leadership today actually is we've got greater uncertainty than ever before. And actually that means that we need to lead with more doubt rather than certainty.
Fascinating, isn't it? And that leading with doubt is all about, as you've said, surfacing this,
It is.
bringing the awareness, bringing the attention to it, and really focusing on it.
It is an absolute, and I want to be really clear. I'm not saying it's just doubt. It's about active doubt. And active doubt is the process to get to clarity and decision making. If you don't make it active, then you're just swirling, and that's no good to anybody.
And that leads me to one idea from your book. Look,
Yeah.
Jenny, I'm a good student. I have it right
Thank
here in
you.
my. One idea from the book that really stayed with me is when you talk about the do in doubt, and the idea that doubt shouldn't just sit there ignored. Exactly what you're mentioning. It should prompt us to do something with it, to engage with the feeling of doubt. We're recording this chat in March while I'm training for the London Marathon. As the miles get longer, doubt is
Yes,
heavily creeping in.
I've been
But
there.
you've been there 4 times.
Oh,
I'm in awe.
bless
Um,
you.
so I'm trying to focus on the do,
Yes.
keep training, adjust what I need to adjust, and take the next step. Can you tell us a bit more about that do? You've mentioned active doubt, but just anything else about that do part of doubt?
Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the running metaphor as such. And the one thing I would say about your running is I firmly believe that if you do the training and you follow the process of it, you get round, and anybody and everyone can get round, and you will get round, Louise, you will. But in terms of doubt, it is this idea of it's a process. And so it's about saying, actually, what's the process that we need to follow. And in the book, I talk about as you've said, self-doubt, situational doubt, and systemic doubt. And there are different processes that you will follow depending on how you're working with those different types of doubt. And so if you take the self-doubt, one of the aspects that I talk about is actually flow, which is interesting when you think about, I've just thought about the parallels with running, because you're wanting to get into flow with with running. And actually it's about actually the first part of the process is about the F, and it's about facing it. And so facing into the doubt and actually naming it. Because if you name it, one of the things I talk about is you can tame it. So first of all, it's that surfacing it. And then it's about actually listening to it. So what's it here to tell me? Because there's wisdom in the doubt. Such. So your doubt might be, I can't get round. And actually, at its simplest, it's saying, you need to go out and do the run tomorrow, Louise.
Yeah. And I need to do, I went straight into Googling, I need to be doing more stretches. The fueling part is now so essential. So maybe
listening to it.
It's surfaced and I listened to those insights. Yeah.
And what I love about what you've just described is then the next part about it, which is open it up. So actually explore what it is. So through your Googling, you're exploring what it is. And then interestingly and maybe not appropriately for what we're just talking about with your running, is the W, which is walk forward.
Right.
In your
Run
case,
forward.
I'm going to say run forward.
Exactly.
As such. And that's a really simple metaphor, but you can actually and process, but you can apply that to your own self-doubts through at work and more complex situations. And then I talk about different ways of doing doubt in terms of situational doubt and systemic doubt as well. But it's all about thinking of it much more as a process, which is what makes it active.
This is so interesting, isn't it? That we feel these things, we're experiencing these things, but starting to create this awareness around it gives us so much more. It's given me, again, back to my running example, it's given me a sense of sort of control. What I feel about, I still don't know if I'm going to finish it. I still don't know if I'm going to get round. But this doubt I've been feeling, and through those steps you've just mentioned, has made me feel like I have a little bit more sort of control towards a situation.
And also your doubt is good in this situation because it's something you've not done before, and it's indicating that you are growing and that you're changing yourself. And so often people will come to me, I mean, really common with coaching clients, they will come and say, I've just got promoted and I'm feeling I've got imposter syndrome. I have that conversation repeatedly, and I understand that conversation, and I've been there myself. And actually I say brilliant, which is not what they expect me to say, as such, because the imposter syndrome is a symptom, if you like, of you're challenging yourself, you're in a growth space, and that is brilliant, and you're pushing yourself, and it's what you're going to do with it. And so it's a really normal human experience to have when you've got a new job and you don't know what to do. And actually we need to humanize it, but also recognize actually if you're feeling it, that's not a bad thing.
It's okay.
It's
Yeah.
okay. And let's use it as a process to figure out how to work through this as such. But, if you're not feeling imposter syndrome at some point, you're probably not pushing yourself enough.
Not right. You're not into that growth zone.
Yes, and the growth mindset.
So, Jenny, many leaders worry that showing doubt will undermine their authority. So we've talked about recognizing it and seeing it and noticing it. In your experience, how can leaders acknowledge uncertainty or doubt in a way that actually builds trust and credibility rather than eroding it?
Yeah, I think doubt is critical to build trust in leaders. That's my first point, because nobody can have all of the answers. And so to create fellowship within your organization, your people need to know actually that you're going to speak the truth, and you're going to express what you do and don't know. And so actually in its rawest form, it does create trust. And you asked me how do you do this? Because I think that's really important. If you just keep saying, I don't know, that's no help to anybody. And I think there's 2 points that I would make in this conversation, Louise. One is around space, and the other is around language. So by space, what I encourage leaders to think about is how they create the space for doubt to show up. So that might be as simple as them listening for no doubt. So, how many times do you sit around a table and nobody's expressing any doubts? That's not healthy. That's not high performing team at all. So as a leader, how do you create the space for your team to be able to share their doubts? So is that through then asking the questions, actually directly inviting, what are your doubts about this?
Mm.
You
Yeah,
know,
a very easy approach.
some of
Mm.
this is really easy, but we
Mm.
don't do it. So thinking about how can I as a leader create the space for active doubt to be constructive actually with my colleagues is the first thing. And then the second part of that is then also about the language that we use. And so for me, it's much more about leaning into I'm not sure, but I'm really curious about this. So rather than sort of shutting things down, using sort of real possibility and maybe language and what if to invite more of that discussion, but you can preface it with, I don't know, let's unpack this. I don't know, but what do we know? And so the language that leaders are using, both in terms of that, it's about them role modeling doubt to actually enable the doubt to also be surfaced from their teams so that collectively, particularly in situational doubt, you can get to better places together. So space and language is critical for leaders to exhibit.
Do you, in your experience, think leaders that you work with all the time find it easy to modify their language to do that, to open the room up and the conversations and let some of that uncertainty come through?
I think it depends, and it depends on the personality, and it depends on. So one of the things that when I'm working with people, we will actively explore is what is their relationship with doubt. So, getting their own comfort levels with the role the role that it's played in their lives, and so that it's comfortable within themselves, first of all. And I think once you get that alignment and congruence within self, it becomes easier then when they're working in partnership with their teams and with their stakeholders, to do that. But it starts with self.
Yeah, so understanding self before you can then start to understand or at least help others.
Yes, and understand the positive role of it as well, which I guess is the core essence of what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. It's fully, even though the well, I guess that's the reason you've called it brilliant doubt. We would always see doubt as something that is perhaps a negative, and it's absolutely not.
Well, you might like this, but the phrase "brilliant doubt" I've had for years, and it's always been I guess a private thing that I've thought about my clients, and I've always privately called them brilliant doubters. And it wasn't anything that I intended to use to surface. It was never going to see the light of day on a website or anything. But I always thought, who do I work with? And I was always just struck by I'm working with these brilliant people and full of doubt. and hence where the brilliant doubters came from. And that's kind of where I guess my interest first came about with the book was, well, why is that? And maybe it's because of their doubt that is making them brilliant. And that was the hypothesis for the book. And that's where I started to do the research and unpack it. And so I started with self-doubt. And as I got further down the doubt tunnel, I realized it was just a much bigger subject when I got into research. But yes, my clients have and always have been called brilliant doubters.
Fantastic. And you refer to a few in the book
I
as
do.
that as well, which is so lovely. Um, Back to the book, you talk about the shift from a VUCA world, so a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment, to what some now describe as BANI, a BANI world, standing for brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. Um, Hearing those words, it almost feels inevitable that leaders are going to experience more doubt, not less. So, what can leaders do to create a team or organizational culture where people feel safe to voice questions, challenge, and where doubt is explored constructively rather than mistaken for a lack of confidence?
Yeah. And I think what you're really touching on is systemic doubt for me, is how do you create a
The
system,
third.
the third layer, which allows doubt to surface? Because if you don't have that, then you end up with institutional blindness, and that can have serious major consequences, both on individuals, the organization, and the people that organization is there to serve. So this is critical, absolutely critical. And for me, it's about the architecture and the culture that senior leaders create, and it starts at the top. And so when you're looking at how to create a culture of where doubt is permissible and constructive, and you can use it to the organization's advantage, you've got to start with what's happening at the board and with the senior leadership team. And you need to start looking at actually what's their relationship with it there, and how do they operate? What's happening in their meetings in terms of them allowing them to surface doubt. If doubt is not allowed to be allowed at those senior meetings, then you're not going to find doubt elsewhere in the organization. They're just going to, the rest of the organization is going to mirror that. A lot of my work when I'm working with senior leadership teams is actually looking at how doubt is surfaced in those meetings, and coaching them around doing that. And then the second part of this, and you're starting to get into governance as well when you're looking at that top tier, because doubt is critical for governance. It's critical in terms of that challenge and making sure that the organization is operating in the way that it needs to. And second part of this is then saying, what are the processes that we can put in place to actually enable doubt to be surfaced? And that might be around things. So I talk about, I don't know, actually, I don't talk about it in the book, but a really good example is at Pixar. They have the Brain Trust, which is if you're a director of a film, you can take your early rough cuts of the film to the Brain Trust, which is all experts who, and they give their feedback. They give their critical feedback back to the director. So their doubts, and I'm sure some constructive things as well. And then the director can then do with that what they want to. They can take it on board, but they can also not. And that's a really good example of a process that's baked into an organization that creates, formalizes doubt, essentially. If you look at venture capitalists, they've got other processes that they also use, which is what I do talk about in the book as well, around how do we challenge what we're going to be investing in. And actually, other industries can actually take these ideas and say, actually, how do we populate this and make this relevant for us? And so those kinds of processes in are really important around changing that culture. And then finally, and one of the big things that I also talk about is actually tracking doubt. So lots of organizations have employee engagement surveys. They're tracking, where the heartbeat of the company is and what is happening with their employees. Actually, you can track how easy it is for doubt to be surfaced. So am I comfortable voicing my doubts? You could put it onto one of those surveys. That would give you really meaningful, concrete data about how effective the organisation is about using doubt, and start a conversation as well. So this thing about, have you got the architecture in place from the top all the way through the processes and then down to actually tracking it as well, is really important to systemize doubt.
Fantastic. And I think there's such it's such a valid question to be asking, and there are a number of those questions. I've seen several of these surveys, these engagement surveys, and we have proposed, over the years, adding questions to these to really get to the heart of some of the matter. And it's often felt actually that they're a bit locked. No, these are the questions we ask, and these are the questions we will continue to ask. So we've got that sort of comparative metrics. But there has to come a point where some new questions, especially as the markets shift, as the globe changes, and as uncertainty is rife, as we're in new new world right now.
Yes.
These questions need to meet and match
Yes.
the feelings of what we need to know from employees, particularly to dig in and sort of peel that onion and get to the heart of some of these things.
And that will then make more engaged employees. And also you will get to where we started at the beginning of this, greater clarity, better decision making, because it facilitates that.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jenny, moving on to the harder part of our conversation today.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head with that.
We're moving away a little bit from brilliant doubt. I don't know. It might come up in your answers here. So we're going to just take a step back for a moment. This year marks 20 years of Claritas, and over that time, communications has changed rapidly. Some lessons still endure. If you could go back to your 20-year-old self, what's the one piece of career advice you would give?
I would probably stick with the doubt point, because I was full of doubt at 20, and I would argue I have led a life of doubt. So to talk to my 20-year-old self, I would say, first of all, realize everyone doubts, from the CEO through the organization. And that's what being human is. And instead of running away from it, instead of retreating, ask it how it can help you, and realize actually it's here to help rather than to hinder. And I think I got there eventually, but it took me an awful long time to get there. And so I think if I could have said that to my 20-year-old self, particularly in my 20s, where I was really full of doubt around my ability, I think that would have made a huge difference.
So there is still that red thread, and your doubt has led through to your brilliance as well, through your corporate career and through your coaching career. It really has.
That's the irony.
It's an enabler.
It is an enabler, but my goodness, it took me a long time to realize that. And you can't go back and change it. And I wouldn't want to go back and change it. But, the what if I'd realized that sooner. I did a session last week for International Women's Day, talking about all the great stuff we're talking about with professional doubt. And invariably, imposter syndrome came up and self-doubt came up. And it was kind of the lion's share of the conversation, which I understand and I get. And as soon as you start to challenge people around it and to think differently, honestly, Louise, I can see people shifting and changing in the room.
I bet. I bet. We're not very gentle with ourselves, are we? There are these social sort of stigmas, and what you're doing with Brilliant Doubt is changing that narrative, changing that it's a bad thing, uncertainty, doubt, not having the clarity, that's a bad thing. And of course, your example, you experienced it when you were 20. We need to have a little more compassion, but I think society needs to enable that as well.
Completely. And our leaders as well.
So looking forward, if you could put one idea or piece of advice into a time capsule, what would it be and why does it matter?
Well, we're moving rapidly into this AI machine orientated world, and doubt is what makes us human. There are other things. So what I'd be putting into the capsule is doubt is what makes us human. And our real power is how we use that doubt to challenge and to question and to keep questioning the automation and the AI so that we use it constructively and to get to a better place. And, I hope in 20 years' time we haven't lost that. And if we can keep hold of that on our journey and our partnership with the machines, that's what's really going to make the difference, or part of it's going to make the difference. And we need it. We need it more than ever.
That leads into there's a lot of discussion around judgment. Judgment is what AI can't do right now, and doubt is part of that. Doubt is part of having that judgment, the ability to have that judgment. You've got to see it first, though, haven't you? Recognize it, which is exactly that first step that you took us on in our conversation today.
Yeah. So we've got to really start recognizing that that's part of what we bring. That's our gifts. It's part of our contribution. It's part of what will make the automated world successful. And if we get that, then we're in trouble. But we don't have to forget it.
Jenny, we could go on. I know we could. It's such a deep topic. I would encourage everyone that's listening to get a copy of your book. Today's conversation reminds us that doubt isn't the opposite of clarity. It may be one of the ways you actually find it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for all of your deep perspectives and thinking today. It's invaluable. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Lovely. If this episode gave you a new perspective on doubt and clarity, please share it with a leader who might find it useful. And remember, sometimes the path to clarity begins with the courage to pause, question, and think again. Thanks for listening to Clarity Matters.